G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks Off Ukraine War Update for the 27th of August 2026. I'm your host, the author David Applegate, author of the books The Boyhood of Cade, Power Games, Into the Ellsbound, and Erotic Tales from the Empire. All my links are in the link tree. As the war continues, I shall continue to bring you comprehensive news and analysis from both sides of the war. Now, in today's video, we are going, of course, to start with the Ukraine map. Then we're going to look at Ukraine's strikes on Russia, where there has been a number of major setbacks for private companies in Russia, but it does not look like they're striking military targets, which begs to question the real purpose of the war. We look at Russia's aircraft production, and I have some bad news for those who support Ukraine. And from the Russian side, we have reports of Ukraine's attacks on Donetsk. Russia's reporting a story about the UN being uninterested in peace. Is that anybody should be surprised that the UN is uninterested in peace? Shift in foreign policy in Hungary. Russia's outlining its response to Ukraine's attacks today, and had they already begun? And we'll look at the Russian response today and what is likely to continue, and reports of Russia taking 2 towns. Right, so let's begin. Now, as you note, it is a sea of red, with Russia carrying out a cluster of strikes over the last 24 hours in Kiev. Though they've reduced the amount of artillery on, they have continued with their artillery campaign in the north, with a breakthrough in the northern buffer zone, which I think it now qualifies as a new front. This is beyond building a buffer zone. A buffer zone, yeah. Although, if you're going to have such a large buffer zone on your border, that's more of a territorial grab. This is definitely a new front. Sumi is probably for some time, and was before, but this is definitely looking like a new front, and we are looking at the beginnings of a winter campaign, in my opinion. Same here. I think Kharkiv is the advances they've had in Kharkiv with Vilny, and look at this. This is beyond just securing one's borders. This is definitely a land grab and a new front. But of course, it is all in service of drawing Ukrainian troops off other fronts, particularly Kharkiv, where Russia has made some, but very little progress. Almost nothing in Lugansk. It's a yo-yo. They have not put the they do not have the manpower. Well, they do, but they're not put it into this, what you would call a focused fire campaign. Instead, they remain spread out, trying to set 1,000 fires, but all of them burning out quickly. And you can see that the uh, front is lacking momentum because they're too spread. They'd have to double their numbers to maintain the momentum they had before. And why is that? Because in the initial phases of any project, think about yourself. Any project you start, where is 80% of your work? In the first 20 minutes. All the planning, all the momentum, the speed. But over time you're burning out your energy and it's not replenished. Right? You have to take an entire for every day you work, you almost have to take it, you never see that, you know, for that 8 hours or so, you're just needing to recover. So imagine you're not getting that recovery at the level, right? Yeah, you can see why the majority of soldiers, yeah, they are more and more likely to want to sit in their trenches, more and more likely not wanting to go forward. More and as the war continues, this is where you find wars grind to a halt. There's, the planners in World War One, they had to literally, terrify the soldiers into realizing that if they didn't charge over the lines, the guns would fall short. And I think you all knew what that threat meant to a soldier in the field. So, World War Two, there wasn't so. World War Two, yeah, showed you that if you're motivated enough, you over, yeah, you overachieve. And since then, every country's tried to replicate that momentum, and you see it with the abuse of patriotism, I would say, in popular culture. But we do see the Russian front in many opening up is opening up in combat, right? But it is not doesn't have the momentum of the initial invasion, and it never will because the soldiers who carried that out are no longer there. The soldiers who are coming in are more interested in defending Russia than they are taking Ukraine. They are less motivated than before and it won't get any better under the current conditions because there's no. Now, that can change, of course, if the amount of tax on Russia start to hurt families more, start to hurt the civilians more, and you'll see growing pressure. The growing civilian casualties are going to grow pressure in Russia not to end this war. We have I can't think of a war where, and someone will remind me, please, if there's a war where bombing civilians into submission in the modern era has worked. Only in the short term, I think. In the long term, it works against you every time. Ultimately, you may see, oh, look, the commies have momentum in New York. Yeah, but that's because the commies use crime to drive people out. They use high taxes to reduce your population. You keep giving in to the worst. You keep giving in to the promises of better to only keep getting the worst outcomes. And no matter how much we warn you against voting for free stuff, it doesn't work. And it's the same with Ukraine. Ukraine's in a mess because it expects handouts, and those handouts are going to stop when the war is over. The people don't want the war to stop. So they're in a precarious situation. If they wanted the war to stop, they would have accepted the 2022 peace deal. If they really wanted the war to stop, and they would have stopped the provocations of Russia long ago. Ukraine is short on heroes, absolutely. But turning to World War II collaborators on both sides, whether they supported remember, the Ukrainian army in World War II supported Russia, killed a lot of civilians, switched sides when the Germans invaded, killed more civilians, switched sides again after the Soviet invasion, and most of them got killed. But they also killed a lot of civilians. When you have a country with such a bad history, I can understand why you want a good history. But Zelensky's not the answer. Never put stock in one person to create a new set of heroes. Look to civilian achievements. Look to agriculture. Look to science. Look to less militaristic heroes. You want peaceful outcomes, you invest in peaceful people. That is that simple. While you continue to feed the egos of the warmongers, and Fedorov, I think, has said it right. You're on the path to destruction, you're not on a path to victory. This is his opinion, not mine. But I agree with him but I don't think it's going to be as bad as he claims. And that's why so many Ukrainians are still hesitant, because it is not yet apparent. But he may know something a lot of us don't. And he may be not estimating, but fearing the solution is not a threat, but a plan. And if it is a plan, and that these targeted attacks that Russia is engaged in, particularly with glide bombs, and measuring very carefully the effects on Ukraine, and if they are doing that and using AI pattern recognition to see, and we'll get to the Ukrainian economy later, what Russia has to do in not years, but to cut years off the war. So let's say this war was planned for 10 years and Ukraine knew it. And that Ukraine knew that they just had to fight on for 10 years. And they achieved that and only lost 10% of their land. I don't think they would be so upset. But let's say they lost 30%, regained 10%, but the cost in life, and it's only 5 years of war, and they go, well, we're not losing that many soldiers. They would fight on. But what we see is some level of don't care. So there is no appealing to the people to end this war, I don't think, because they don't care the casualties. And that is decades of propaganda, which tells me no matter what you think, Ukraine is not headed for a good place. Because after the war, women aren't going to turn around and suddenly care for the heroes. No. It's all short term. It's all cope and seize. Yeah, so without knowing the devastation that Ukraine has suffered, it's hard to estimate exactly where they're at. But we can see Russia's taken some more territory. It isn't much, but it's still every day they're grinding on. But again, no key towns in this area have fallen. But Ukraine will soon, I don't know, will they counterattack? Will they take advantage of the winter? Or is Russia building up for the winter, just keeping the Ukrainians unsettled. Now, there is a breakthrough here that has slightly grown. This the front has slightly changed here, but it has not. Yeah, it's only growing, and they are trying to go around to cut these towns off. The fighting here is continuing, though the Ukrainians are trying to infiltrate and push back. The Russians have not made much of a dent to this area as well. And fighting continues with small gains in Zaporozhye. Now, Russia's claimed to have made a breakthrough here and pushed through to. I think this marker's in the wrong place, but see, yeah, the marker's in the wrong place. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. A lot of the time, though, and I'm not saying Russia's lying or Ukraine is lying. A lot of the time, though, Russia goes in, takes photos, proves they've taken a town, only to lose it an hour later because it is a trap. I mean, I've seen Ukraine do this before, where Russia races into a small town. They the second and third wave of Ukrainians who are waiting in the trenches do come out to play. No, they don't always, but if the Russians move into a town and fail to dig in and fail to defend, you can't say they didn't take the town and lost it. I mean, it's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of changes to the battlefield over the coming months, and not all of them are going to be permanent. Ukraine is not permanently taking back territory here. They're beginning to lose it. Russia still hasn't caught up to 2022. So take it with a grain of salt, particularly with what's going on in Zaporozhye. And remember, Ukraine wouldn't be ordering mass evacuations along here. Why are they moving? It does appear that they are anticipating a heavy loss as deep into Ukraine as here. All this. They are preparing for a heavy loss in the winter, which there is always talk. And there is a lot of equipment that has been shown in the past that has not shown up in Ukraine. Russia's sitting on way more tanks than it's deployed. A lot of these vehicles are currently out of range of Ukraine missiles. A lot of equipment and training is going on in and around North Korea and Siberia right now. But when? I mean, Barbarossa, 6 months after Barbarossa, the Russian withdrawal had finished, and a few months later they launched their first of many attacks. I think it took about a year to a year and a half to get the entire army remobilized. But don't forget, they had far less trucks, although the cost, I think, is so. If Russia can't get out of its diesel hole, then yes, things are going to be slow. But if they get out of that diesel hole, if the air defenses improve over the next couple of months, we're definitely going to see shifts. Now, for now, I believe these attacks on the Russian economy are petty and ultimately revenge motivated and are going to backfire on Ukraine. And I think they're a waste of time. I don't think there's any military value in them. and will not bring about the end of the war. Now, before I continue, Empire Valves, that's one word, empirevalves.myshopify.com, your one-stop shop for enchanting treasures based on my writing. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope that you too will step into the world of wonder with the Empire of Elves, where science and technology meet fantasy, hope, and wonder. Now, Ukrainian drones have killed 12 in Russia. That's 12. They're openly admitting to causing civilian deaths with no backlash. Now, there were separate fires. One was a major oil facility and the other one a warehouse. All the other claimed strikes are not verified. It is verified that Russia destroyed around 400 to 430 Ukrainian drones, many of them over the Donbass. Most of the drones do not make it to targets. So that's what Su-34 looks like in about midway production. Now, I'm not going to play the whole thing. Most of it is, this is what they look like from the cockpit, the view from the cockpit. Now, this is the longest range fighter in Russian service and is being retooled. This is the latest version of the Su-34. For all we know, this is somewhere in Russia, but it could also be North Korea. I doubt it. I doubt they've moved that many factories. But Russia has moved several hundred factories. But it has been confirmed by, let's see, no, Su-34 Strike Fighter, which Military Watch magazine reported that extensive use of the Su-34s over Ukraine have provided substantial advantage to Russia. They have inflicted more damage than they deliver guide bombs. In fact, they're probably more devastating to the front line than tanks and artillery. Russia has accelerated the production and delivery of new batches of the Su-34. The current batch you see on screen is in fact due next month. Well, it's not all at once. Don't forget we don't know what stage of production this is. It's estimated about halfway from what I can understand, find out. But these are state-owned. They are licensed they are licensed from the United Aircraft Corporation, who themselves continue to create new batches of Su-34. So what we're looking at is estimated to be a state enterprise, which could mean it's North Korea, right? They produce new batches of Su-34. They are, right, these ones are to replenish losses, but they are also upgraded. These are improved precision strike, new antenna fairings to support long-range guide bomb operations. Remember, they're guided. So the aircraft in the tail section has a satellite receiver, and in the nose it has a forward transmitter which guides the bomb to target. Now, the current glide bombs, I think there's 500, 100, 250, and I think there's a huge jump, 1,000, and then, yeah, so 250, 500, 1,000, and 3,000. Primarily, though, they're used to fire 122mm rockets. These are increasingly laser guided, but we don't know to what extent they still use uh, dumb munitions. Now, Ukraine has attacked Donetsk with storm shadows. There was a successful attack. Russia's vowed to retaliate, and there has actually been some retaliation. However, before we get to the retaliation, around the same time, the UN is in internal conflict. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency has taken a broad side at the UN Secretary General over his lack of visible results in resolving Ukraine and other conflicts, and is now gunning for his job. And though the UN is uninterested in peace, when it comes to virtue signaling and achievements, well, the UN is top of the list for virtue signaling and listing their long list of achievements, which no one can verify most of the time, but they swear they swear it was them and not Donald Trump or Europe or Russia or anyone else. No, it's always the UN. But ultimately, this is one more step to taking the UN down a peg. That the organisation is corrupt, inefficient, and pretty much ignored by some governments anyway, one of those being Russia. In a long running dispute. Now, you can dispute Viktor Orban and his stance, but Hungary has shifted from neutral to threat when it comes to Russia, and this does come on the wave of the failures of any plans for sustainable peace and long-term security and coexistence with Europe by both sides. But Hungary is landlocked in Europe, so they can't say, "Hey, we're going to move to a new neighbourhood." No, they're landlocked. They have no choice but to view Russia as a threat because neither side can produce results. And when you live in a neighbourhood, you tend to stick with that. You tend to be stuck there. You know. Now, Eastern Europe is bracing for the possibility of war. Well, it's not going to be. It's not going to be kinetic. I think it's going to be asymmetric. And Russia, however, is preparing for a heavy response. Now, they have responded and preparing for both have and will respond to today's attacks. Now, in response to today's drone attacks on Wildberries, they did launch retaliatory missile and drone bombardments against Ukrainian infrastructure, trade centers, and civilian logistics, primarily in Kiev. Russia did, however, also launch counterstrikes against uh, Ukrainian military positions, as you saw with the bombardment in Seversk and other parts of Donetsk. They also attacked Ukrainian distribution centers and cargo terminals in Odessa, not Odessa, but and postal operator Nova Poshta and their retail chains across Ukraine, but particularly in the Odessa region. So not Odessa itself, but in and around that coastal area, they've attacked retail postal operators. That's delivery of parcels. Now, Russia has issued the usual air defense notices and put out the numbers, but those really don't mean much. But moving on, what does mean is two things. One, the move to gear up the state to take control of major commercial hubs. The state, though denying initial military use, has made, and so has Wildberries, by the way, moves to compensate and defer taxes and provide subsidies to companies and regions affected by the financial shock on merchants. Now, there has been an economic impact on sellers and banks, particularly with oil and gas production reduction. But overall, the Russian economy is still up by 0.8%. Ukraine has only slowed the Russian growth, and Russia continues to expand and expand with more factories built in the last 12 months than in the previous 12 months. Most of them are now moving out of range, and they are looking to revive some of the old rail networks that were pretty much so Russia's gearing up to a full war economy with alternative routes of their equipment to the front lines. Ultimately, though, there will be choke points they can't avoid, given that they have to come from a wide area down to a narrow area, and they have to refuel along the way. So there are choke points and will be obvious. Now, Russia's attacks on Black Sea ports have substantially hurt Ukraine. This is where their Russian retaliation is at its sharpest. The Black Sea ports. They have resulted in a drop of 76% in grain shipments for August. This has now June 2%. By July that had risen, and in the latest attacks, Ukraine has lost 5.3% of its annual GDP. That is why Zelensky's asking for 27 billion. They are short on their annual budget. Now, it's not just seabound grain, right? Because some of it can go overland. In fact, roughly 90% of Ukraine's seabound grain has also been destroyed. Remember, they didn't just destroy factories; they destroyed warehouses. Grain shipments have fallen sharply. The sea traffic in and around Odessa is choked, costing Ukraine money and GDP losses. Now, again, just in the port strikes alone, 1.8% of its GDP. This will grow. Now, there's also the forward losses. GDP lost today, meaning next year's infrastructure spending has to be spent today. 2027's infrastructure has to be spent. 2028's infrastructure spending has to be spent in 2027. And they will have to defer some of their loans in order to catch up by 2030, meaning they will lose not just 1.8% this year, but 2.1% next year in borrowings to try to catch up, and they will not. And it's estimated by 2030 it'll be again 5.3%. So overall, the GDP loss is not just immediate, but next year and the year after, we'll see a continued loss before the growth catches up. So they have been set back to 2025's GDP, effectively, given all the losses added up over the last 12 months. Now, the financial strain on individual farmers is where it hurts the most. risking future investments and future harvests, which are incalculable because a lot of the time the state will take those farms and give them to someone else. They are not fully private. They No farm really is, by the way. There's always national contingencies, national emergencies. The farmer goes bankrupt, they'll take the land and sell it to someone else. It's why property taxes are so insidious, because it means you never own the property. You're never free from the state's control. As you are pretty much always, whether you're communist or capitalist, if you're a farmer, you might as well be in a communist state because you don't own your property. You're always one harvest away from communism. Now, there are bottlenecks. Now, Ukraine is rerouting goods through the Danube and Western Rail. However, coming winter means lower water levels, meaning the Danube flow further restricted for capacity. And also, having been to Europe, I can tell you, one of the ways they keep the water channels across Europe flowing through the winter is releasing lots of hot water. And even during the Cold War, you had cooperation as far as Poland and many other countries to keep riverways from freezing. Poland is not going to struggle. Hungary, maybe, but if the gas flow continues, they will be able to do it. Romania, probably, but the water levels are low. Why is that? Well, we haven't had the high rainfall. All this, remember, coming into winter, the shift in weather patterns. So, with the rainfall further north this year and the expected cold, we're going to see a lot. Yeah, we're going to see a slowdown in the winter. I do not see a Russian offensive all for long in winter. I think it'll be a bloody battle, but it won't be a major offensive. I could be wrong. Russia might be gearing up exactly for that, a terrible winter in which, but again, there ain't that much difference between the T80 and the T90 other than the fact the T90 is meant to be faster and the T90 is meant to be a grunt. But of course, America's heavy armor-piercing artillery has effectively neutered Russia's tank ability to carry out large tank offensives. Now, there are no verifications on territory grabbed, by the way. Ukraine will never verify any territory attacked. So take it with a grain of salt that Russia has taken out 3 of the fuel tanks in Ishmael, as there is no verification. And they hit a dry cargo ship. There was a ship damaged in port. The nature and name of that ship was never released at the time of recording. Though there are articles that often appear and they say, 6 hours ago, and I swear they weren't there before. So take it with a grain of salt that the media are playing silly buggers with the truth again. But digging through, what I can find is Peshawar is most likely contested, but Russia has definitely attacked Peveshka. And as for Neveska, it is most likely a Russian infiltration, hoping that the rest of the army will catch up before the Ukrainian counteroffensive. This is not new. Strike forces are common. Ukraine has done this as well, where they break through Russian lines, try to hold a town to force to force the retreat or reorganization of the army and split Russia's fighting, allowing the rest of their army to have a major breakthrough. Spearhead attacks. Anything you could do to Russia, Russia could do back to you. It is not the Soviet doctrine. It's not the days of Soviet doctrine where the Russian soldier was not allowed to think on his feet. Now, if you're wondering, yes, the Russians are wearing full bodysuit armor under that, and you can see under the poncho, and they are increasingly using goggles. This is probably not indicative of your typical Russian soldier. This is more like strike forces, your patrols, your cutting edge of the army, not your typical trench soldier. Yeah, more closer to special forces than to regular army. But the battle groups do have various Marines, forget the name of the special forces because it's not Spetsnaz. Spetsnaz is different. I'm talking about the Army Russian Assault Forces. They carry out, they're the ones who go first, so to speak. Now, again, this is an official Russian claim. Ukrainian authorities have not, will not, and do not immediately comment or confirm any capture, and independent verification often remains difficult for days, if not weeks. But these are on many maps marked in the, some have it the yellow zone. Sorry. Preveska in Sumy is in the grey zone, which means it is inside areas controlled by Russia and contested by Ukraine, whereas Nezhika in Zaporozhye is in the yellow zone. These are areas controlled by Ukraine but infiltrated by Russian forces. Now, I'm just quickly going to take a peek at Military Watch. All right. Why is the aircraft still yellow? Because that's the primer. You'll see their colors in September. This is a significant acceleration of production to bring forward delivery of the Su-34. This is one of many fighters that have received a lot of attention since the disintegration of the Soviet Union. As you may know, during the Soviet Union, it was primarily the Migorin series of fighters that got most of the attention. But Sikorsky has always been there and always will be there. They are pretty much one of the fathers of modern aviation. So as Migorin, they were responsible for many aircraft. Now, the United Aircraft Corporation is an umbrella company under Russian State Defense Procurement Program. This is the heaviest and longest range aircraft. Sorry, I said in Russia. It's actually in the world. We're 50% larger than the Su-27, of which its design is loosely based. Yeah, the Su-27 was the highest flying interceptor for quite some time. Though they never officially produced the SR-71 interceptor, it was planned for. Now, this, if using external fuel tanks, can go over 2,500 kilometers. Yeah. And, yeah, can achieve intercontinental with refuelers. Now, one of its primary friends is the glide bomb to extend its range by up to 500, its strike range by up to 500 kilometers. That may be more with the airborne Banderal, sorry, but its most common friend is the S-300 glide bomb. Now, extensive use of Su-34s and Rostec, which is the official name of the prime defense contractor of Russia, have revealed plans back in December 25 to increase aircraft production, as well as improvements not just for the combat but for the pilot, to reduce pilot fatigue, to which has shown to increase strike precision and increased survivability, not just of the aircraft but of the pilot, by extending their flight time. Now, one of the things about this aircraft is more powerful, and they could travel hundreds of kilometers from their home field at much higher speeds than previously. Though the Russians did lose a lot in the initial stages of the war, and some on the ground. However, these are the most effective air power currently in Ukraine and have inflicted more damage than ground forces. Yeah, only exceeded by ballistic missile strikes. Now, it is claimed that NATO is preparing for a maritime blockade of Russia in the Baltic to cut them off completely from the Baltic Sea. Russia has unveiled. Russia is not the only one who's unveiled new aircraft and new missiles, by the way, China as well. But for now, only North Korean missiles have been officially purchased by the Russian state. Russia has actually complained about the T-10 from China, which was meant to bridge the T-14 program. There are a number of other setbacks in Russian production by having sold some of their companies to China. They are now suffering setbacks in trucks, particularly the off-road vehicles they need, the heavy off-road vehicles they need to transport missiles. But China has now lodged official complaints that the Russian state has used current laws to take over a private company. It's opposite day. A communist country is complaining that the Russian state has taken over a private company. You can't make this stuff up. But yes, a Chinese company has lost control of a Russian company, allegedly over not paying their taxes. What? The communists not paying their taxes? No, never. They're honest, upright, forthright citizens. So, take it with a grain of salt that this is going to be tomorrow's news. The kids are, and no doubt, and I do not think it is within the realm of possibility, that we'll definitely soon see whether or not. Where we go? Look at that. More strikes already begun. So, remember the realm of possibility that France or Germany tomorrow, or even Sweden. I'm putting my money on Sweden will deliver new aircraft to Ukraine. Probably 5 to 15 VGen or 5 to 15 Rafale to increase air defenses. Now, again, these, I believe, are firing the Sparrow. The Sparrow is probably the most versatile uh, interceptor slash air. See, the thing that most people don't understand, right? In air-to-air combat, you're effectively firing an interceptor, right? It's just how it's programmed for flight dynamics. And I believe right now, you've seen this. You've got the Sea Sparrow, the Land Hawk. You've got well, it's actually just called the Hawk now, but basically the AIM 6, 7, 8, 9 series. And you've also, in that, you've also got you've got the 6, 7, 8, 9, of much of which 7s and 8s, or they're basically often just called Sparrows, and often the older ones are burnt 6, 7, 8s, but technically the Sparrow's a smaller you've got the AIM 6, AIM 9, but you've got other models because they're French or they're German or they're Italian. You also got Sea Sparrow, which is a different model number. You've got the AIM 9 and then the big jump to AIM 20. And then you've got, I think, the Valiant and other missiles. I think, what's the Valiant? It's the British one, isn't it? On the Bulldog. So, when I'm talking about Sparrow, right, I'm just talking about generic missile in that series because they all derive from the AIM 6, and a lot of them still carry the name Sparrow, even though some are Hawk missiles and they're so dramatically much bigger than the original airborne Sparrow. But my point is, all they need to launch, right, in the air, they already have speed, right, and they have flight dynamics programmed into them, and their heat range is specific to aircraft, and they have a short infrared proximity fuse so that they can explode in front of an aircraft, causing it to basically crash into an explosion, which does more damage than, say, a side shot. They are still basically an interceptor, and that's where you get the Hawk and other missiles from. Now, Ukraine basically popped these out of a canister, just like a Sea Sparrow. And while Ukraine claims credit, it is actually a West Texas company that produces these, and they do produce the launch canisters for the Sea Sparrow. These are basically CO2 canister guns. You may have heard of CO2 canister guns or a flare gun. Well, it's the same principle. The flare is launched by a big poof, right? It's compressed gas cylinder. And, well, they do the same here. Now, I think going forward, and I don't claim to be an expert on curl guns or other forms of gas compression acceleration, but I do think we're going to see that going forward, Ukraine is going to have to start land launching AIM 20s, 120s, and perhaps even trying to get hold of the much bigger variants to land launch as interceptors, which, by all accounts, you don't need someone like me on the sidelines telling you these should have been things already planned for. And we have seen the Hawk. I don't know why they call the Hawk A6 because the Sparrow is the A6, but technically the Hawk is 6, 7, and 8, depending on because the Hawk is just a variant of the Sparrow, but they, for some reason, you have the Sparrow 6 and then the Hawk 6, 7, and 8s, and they again have different names in different countries. Because I do remember in Australia we had the A7, not the A6. And I do know most of these older missiles have either been burnt through or dismantled long ago because they do have a limited short shelf life. But as far as I know, uh, the slower, older interceptors in Ukraine are not worth stockpiling, and Ukraine is trying to sell them off, and UAE has turned them down yet again because Iran is switching to jet powered as well. And it does appear the Russian state is so overproducing in ammunition and missiles, they can afford to supply some to Iran. And China is also buying and reselling, and so is India. And it looks like the world is going to be multipolar after all, in which you're going to have two sanctioned powers sanctioning each other, with China and India playing each other and the rest of the world in their grand scheme to basically undermine the United States and use Europe as some form of battering ram against America, taking advantage of the huge political divisions in the West. And so, while you blame everything on Russia, you are going to be blindsided by a garbage truck driven by Modi and Xi. That doesn't necessarily mean you should hasten the end of the Ukraine war, but if you consider it over now, it's going to be a lot better off for you in the long run. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel. You can support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon. Join my RPG Patreon for as little as $1 a month. And buy my books, buy my merch. And don't forget, I have a Kickstarter coming soon. Empire of Elves. You can find the links in my link tree, which then in turn you can find in my profile. Scan the QR code on the screen, or just look at the description below. It's on YouTube's and Rambers. See you in the next video, and bye for now.